Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn. Proposed plans to develop the Port of Searsport for offshore wind. Offshore wind is key to achieving the climate and clean energy goals set forth in Maine's Climate Action Plan. And there are many things to consider to make sure that its deployment is feasible, that local communities are supportive, and that the industry brings good paying union jobs and economic benefits to the state of Maine. There's a collaborative roadmap planning effort underway right now that will provide a framework to guide the state of Maine in achieving its offshore wind energy goals. At the same time, the state is pursuing a lease area to develop floating offshore wind turbine research array, which will provide important information about the efficacy and impact of floating offshore wind turbines at a commercial scale. And we're also thinking about where and how to site the marine and portside infrastructure that will be necessary to support offshore wind deployment. In March of 2020, Governor Mills requested that MaineDOT conduct a feasibility assessment at the Port of Searsport to explore what we would need to construct floating offshore wind turbines. That study identified two potential concepts that could guide development at the Port of Searsport. And we are delighted to have two incredibly knowledgeable folks with us today to walk us through them. Selena Cunningham is with us from the Governor's Energy Office, and Matthew Burns from the Maine Department of Transportation are here. We are going to talk a little bit about the work underway, the proposals on the table, and how the public can engage with this process. Matt and Selena, thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Kathleen Neal. I am the Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 10,000 members and supporters dedicated to protecting Maine's environment and our democracy. MCA does that through education, collaboration, and advocacy, and MCV by influencing public policy, holding politicians accountable, and winning elections. A few technical notes for today. We will hear from both of our speakers, and then we'll tackle all the questions in the Q&A session at the end. You don't have to wait, though. You can send your questions to me through the chat whenever they occur to you. I'll keep track of them and get them in a good order and combine as necessary and ask those questions of Matt and Selena at the end. If you have any technical difficulties today, you can message Will Sedlak and he will help you out. This event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon, where you can also find recordings of all of our previous Lunch and Learns. Thank you again for joining us. And Selena, I will turn it over to you to kick things off.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you everyone for joining us and for having us here today. Let me go ahead and quickly share my slides. That look all right?
We see it in presenter mode, Selena, just so you know, but yes.
Let's see. I'll just go ahead and go for the purpose of time. Let's see if I can quickly do it. I'm sorry. I'll just leave it as is for now to make sure that we can get through it in time. So again, I'm Selena Cunningham, Deputy Director in the Governor's Energy Office, which is tasked with overseeing offshore wind efforts in the state of Maine and collaborating and coordinating with state agencies as well as stakeholders. And so the state of Maine is pursuing offshore wind through the Offshore Wind Initiative, which was launched in 2019. And we're taking a thoughtful approach to how to best pursue offshore wind. And we're doing this for a number of reasons. First and foremost, from a climate change perspective, in order to meet our climate targets, we need to nearly double the amount of electricity we have in our system over the next 20 or 30 years, which will require significant new energy sources, clean energy sources to allow for this electrification. And so we have both climate and renewable energy goals that we are working to meet, and bringing on a diverse mix of energy sources is part of our strategy, which includes both onshore resources and also pursuing offshore resources, given the significant resource we have in the Gulf of Maine. In addition to that, we see opportunity from economic growth potential, as well as additive jobs for Maine people. And we're doing all of this in a way that is thinking about how to best pursue offshore wind in a way that sustains Maine's maritime heritage, and our approach is to thoughtfully pursue offshore wind to allow for coexistence with Maine's iconic fishing industry. And so we are working on answering fundamental questions about how both industries can be sustained in the Gulf of Maine. And we're doing this through a variety of manners. One is from a planning perspective. I'll briefly talk about the offshore wind roadmap in a moment. Matt will cover our ports work in a little bit. We're also pursuing research and innovation, including a proposed project in federal waters to continue answering some of these fundamental questions, as well as standing up a Maine research consortium. There's been policy steps that have been taken over the last year or two to support a balanced approach to offshore wind. We also recognize that we're not in isolation when it comes to pursuing offshore wind. So how can we collaborate both regionally, nationally, and internationally to thoughtfully pursue offshore wind, share information, lessons learned, and gather the best available data to do so. And just to provide a little bit of context, oh, my notes are there too. Sorry, let's see. How am I going to fix this? Is that better? There. Okay, so a little bit about context about what's happening in offshore wind right now, in terms of both the U.S. industry, floating offshore wind, and ports in other areas. And I'll say that given the water depths in the Gulf of Maine, we are pursuing floating offshore wind technology as opposed to fixed bottom platforms. So this circle here is a little bit hard to read, but it's showing the projects that are anticipated to be under development and then in the 2025, 2026 area, just to show the amount of construction that is planned over the coming years. And the federal government is pursuing additional leases. States are pursuing additional offshore wind targets, and this will require both ports, vessels, workforce, and other supply chain to support this work. It also raises important questions about impacts to fisheries and the environment that we want to understand and learn from as we're seeing this development. In terms of floating technology, while it is newer than fixed bottom, the growth has been pretty significant in terms of interest. In Scotland, there was a recent lease sale where we saw incredible interest for floating projects. California is pursuing floating wind, the UK government, and even New York has flagged that future development of offshore wind will likely be floating in that area as well. From a port's perspective, supporting these large projects require infrastructure on the shore side. And so as we've seen up and down the East Coast, the individual states are taking steps to support the port infrastructure for the anticipated project development that we're going to be seeing. And we're also working closely with our federal government, both on terms of the understanding the energy leasing, energy strategy, how to lower the cost of energy, as well as coordinating with agencies like NOAA on best available information around impacts to ocean users and the marine environment. And so in July of last year, we launched, the state of Maine launched a roadmap process with $2 million from the Economic Development, U.S. Economic Development Administration, to go through a comprehensive planning effort with stakeholders, technical analysis, and other tools to put forward both near and long-term recommendations to support the growth of the offshore wind industry in the state. And so we have over 100 experts meeting regularly. These meetings are open to the public, And we look forward to spending more time with you in the near term, talking through some of those issues that we're working through through that effort. And so the roadmap will focus on 4 key objectives. These are not in any specific order in terms of when we're thinking about what it takes to advance the offshore wind industry in the state. And so we're about in a third of the way through, and we'll have initial recommendations that we will be preparing in the March timeframe, and I think we'll have a chance to come back to you in April to talk through those in a little bit more detail. We really want to make take a thorough process to get input, make sure that we are reaching out to diverse stakeholders with different perspectives and putting forward a holistic plan for the state of Maine when it comes to offshore wind. So with that, there is a lot of resources available on our website. Our past meetings are available. Both Stephanie Watson from the Governor's Energy Office is also on the line. We're both happy to talk to anyone who would like more information about the state's offshore wind initiative. And with that, I'll hand it over to Matt.
Okay. Will, is it okay to share my screen?
You're good to go, Matt.
All righty. Just bear with me for 1 second. Okay, can everybody see that?
We can see it.
Okay, great. That went better than I thought. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for the introduction, Will and Kathleen. My name is Matt Burns. I'm the Director of Ports and Marine Transportation at MaineDOT, and I'm also, since May of 2021, the Interim Executive Director of the Maine Port Authority. My background is as a merchant marine deck officer, and I've been working at home and in a shoreside role here at the Maine DOT and working for the state since about 2017. So I'm excited to talk to you about what we've been doing here with regards to our feasibility study that we conducted in the Port of Searsport, and talk a little bit about the concepts that I guess were born from that, and a little bit about offshore wind as it relates to ports. So obviously the Searsport offshore wind feasibility study that was mentioned at the beginning of the presentation was directed by Governor Mills to the DOT in 2020. The objective for that study was to identify sites for marshalling and wind turbine foundation or hull fabrication, and then also wind turbine generator, I'm sorry. So we wanted to identify a site for marshalling of wind turbine generators and also for foundation fabrication. And that was the objective of the study. So that was really what we were trying to accomplish, was to identify a site where we could perform those roles. The site was analyzed further to support a research scale project in the Gulf of Maine, as well as commercial phases of offshore wind development. This project that we worked on does not relate to the Monhegan project, the single turbine project that I'm sure many of you have heard about and are aware of at this point. We did not, we were not tasked with developing infrastructure to support the launching of that project. On November 23rd, the Mills administration issued a press release on the release of our study and next steps regarding port development for offshore wind, or to support offshore wind in the state of Maine. So what did we use to start our work here in this study? Well, what we needed to obtain were criteria that were necessary to support the construction or the fabrication of these floating hulls, and also to install the wind turbine generators on top of those hulls. So the set of criteria that we use to move forward with this study essentially is about 1,300 to 1,600 feet of berthing area. So that's 2 vessel berths, and an assembly area for assembling the wind turbine foundations. About 33 to 35 feet of draft or available water depth at the berth. A 50 to 60 foot sinking basin. I can get into a little bit about what that means further in the presentation. About 40 to 80 acres of level upland area. And there's some variance there in the amount, depending on how big of a project you're trying to support. 5,000 pounds per square foot loading area, or essentially punch load on the wharf. So you need a very heavy duty and robust wharf surface to be able to move and stage some of these massive components. 3,000 pounds per square foot in the uplands. Again, we're still dealing with very large components in the casting of large concrete portions of the foundation. So a high punch load surface is necessary for that. We need a launching system. So some sort of way to construct the foundation and then actually get it into the water. So it has to go from land into the ocean. And it has to be done very carefully, obviously. So using a semi-submersible barge or a rail and ramp system, something of that nature is required. And then one of the most important things, obviously, when one of these wind turbines is installed on top of the foundation, it's quite tall. So it's necessary that there's no air draft or height restrictions like bridges or telephone wires or anything like that. Just to give you a little bit of information on what we're talking about, these are different examples of wind turbine foundations. All 3 of them are a little different. And from left to right, what you're looking at is a spar type foundation. In the middle is a semi-submersible foundation. And then on the right is what you call a TLP, or a tension-like platform. A lot of them have, they have advantages and disadvantages. Some have different cost implications, but what we really looked at for the purpose of this study was a semi-submersible foundation type. Here's an example of a semi-submersible foundation. You can see the yellow part of the apparatus there is the actual floating foundation. And then obviously you can see the tower is installed on top of that. And then just a little bit of wind turbine 101. These are some of the components of the wind turbine generator that I talked about. The nacelle is like the motor essentially, or the generator. Then you obviously have the blades, the tower, and then the foundation hull. So what does it mean to actually construct and launch these foundations? Well, really, it's 5 simple steps. I'm being facetious. It's not really simple at all. It's quite a complex endeavor, but really it does kind of categorize nicely into 5 distinct phases. So really what you have first is the fabrication of the foundation. And the foundations usually are concrete, steel, or a combination of both. So there's a significant, casting process or steel fabrication process that's involved in constructing something like that. And then what you can see here is the loadout. So this is a bit of a different type of vessel than what we had envisioned in our concept. But essentially what you need to do, like I said, is get that foundation loaded onto a floating asset. So whether that's a barge or a heavy lift vessel, but basically that's done by using SPMTs, which is short for self-propelled modular transporter. And you use a series of those SPMTs to roll the foundation onto the floating asset. Once the foundation has been loaded onto the floating asset, then you have the float off phase, where essentially that vessel or that asset is designed to submerge itself and allow the foundation to become buoyant and then be able to float away from the floating asset. After that happens, the foundation is brought back to the berth for the installation of the WTG. So that means that the tower, the nacelle, and the blades are all installed on top of the foundation, and that system is commissioned, and then the eventual tow out to the installation site. So a large tug type vessel is used to transport the foundation with the WTG installed onto it out to wherever it's going to be installed in the Gulf of Maine or wherever that may be. Okay, so for our study, we evaluated 4 sites in the Port of Searsport. So first was the Mac Point terminal that you can see here. The second is an undeveloped parcel of land to the north of the Sprague property that we call the Put parcel. Third was the GAC Chemical Plant Industrial Park, which made about 100 acres available for study for the work that we were doing. And then the last was the Sears Island transportation parcel. So essentially and I'm skipping a few bits here, but essentially what you see here is a Port of Searsport wind energy port concept. And really it utilizes features or parcels of land on all of those sites that I just mentioned. Some have some distinctions that make them more suitable for certain parts of the process of fabricating and launching wind turbines. And I can get into that a little bit later, but essentially what we're envisioning is an entire port concept or a concept where we could utilize available acreage in the port to build efficiency and really create a versatile port system that is unlike anything else on the East Coast currently. No final decisions have obviously been made on any of these sites. This is all conceptual and really just based off of the land that was available for study, not land that has been purchased or has any sort of contractual arrangement where we're negotiating to obtain that land. This is really just conceptual and for the purpose of seeing if this is possible or if this is something that we can do at the Port of Searsport. Really more environmental design and stakeholder outreach work is necessary before we come close to making any sort of final decisions. So the concept, like I said, incorporates some of the Mac Point parcel that's available for study, a relatively small portion of Sears Island, and potentially the GAC Industrial Park site. The objective here is to fully utilize Mac Point. So really what we're interested in is trying to maximize the use of that facility, to the best that we can. And really if there was any sort of development on Sears Island in hypothetical situation, how could we provide synergy or efficiency between both sites to support each other in the role of constructing these turbines. So really, like I said, it's kind of a conceptual exercise to see what sort of port network we can provide here, or what we have the capability to do. All 3 sites may support the overall goal of commercial fabrication. So meaning what are we thinking about in the future, not just past the pilot project, but also past the research array into commercial scale development that may or may not happen in the Gulf of Maine. So why are, and I know this is a question that many of you have asked and continue to ask, and it's a great question, why Sears Island is in the mix for further analysis, because it is, and I've made that pretty clear in some of these presentations that I've given, that we do intend to collect more data in order to flesh out the concept more at Sears Island. So I thought it was important to kind of say, like, why are we even looking at that? And really there's several reasons, and I'll go through this list here, but available contiguous acreage. It's important for an offshore wind terminal to have a large quayside area, heavy lift area, and also a significant amount of upland acreage for staging of components, fabrication, and those sorts of things. So Sears Island is a site that has that, the transportation parcel specifically. Deep water access, obviously it's not the first time that there's ever been a concept for a terminal there. As a matter of fact, there was even some dredging done there some number of years ago. So there is deep water access directly to the island. We believe that the potential to have to dredge is very limited, if any at all. And that we owe that really to the previously dredged berth that I mentioned there. There's no conflicting rail line that would have to be relocated or purchased if we were going to try and build something there. There's no conflicting marine terminal operations there. Obviously, the Mac Point facility has existing contracts and cargo that they are managing on a regular basis. The cost implications are potentially lower at the Sears Island site. And then also the fact that it's state-owned land that was reserved for development. And obviously just like I said, I am fully aware of the Sears Island Planning Initiative, and that's something that is important to us to make sure that we're honoring as we further flesh out the concept and collect more data. So I'll talk a little bit and share with you the concepts that have come out of this study. And I apologize, this picture looks a little blurry, but essentially what you see here is the south side of the Mac Point terminal. The blue area or purple area is the upland area, and then the green area here is the heavy lift area or the quayside area. What you're looking at here is about 38 total acre concept, and it does really fall smack dab in the terminal. So there are several things that would have to be relocated or demolished in order to accommodate this. But again, Sprague was very generous in offering this area for to make available for this study. So we were able to fit those criteria that I mentioned onto this parcel, and this was a workable concept that came out of that study. What you're looking at here is about a $165 million development effort, obviously subject to permitting, design, and cost. And this type of facility, conceptually could support about 150 to 200 megawatt scale offshore wind project. So essentially a research scale project, similar to what we're the path that the state's currently going down. The next phase of that is the phase 2 or commercial scale terminal concept. Again, same colors, they mean the same thing, although you'll notice here that this is the concept here has widened. What you're looking at is about 65 total acres and about a $284 million cost to do something like this. This concept here would involve a significant amount of dredging. Obviously, you would have vessels that would be, substantially large that would be delivering components to this facility. So you'd need a turning basin that would have to be dredged, and then, deep water access to the quayside. There's a lot of rock ledge that's located at this portion of the bay, and a lot of that would have to be blasted away to accommodate something like this. So a very significant project here that would likely change the face of the Mac Point terminal significantly. And again, this concept is subject to permitting, design, and cost, and needs to be fleshed out quite a bit further. But this is just a preliminary concept that came out of that study. And a facility like this could support a commercial scale project. I'm not sure if I said that already, but about 1,000 megawatts of a project that something like this could support. And here's the Sears Island concepts. So what you're looking at is the west side of the island at the transportation parcel. This is the rock jetty that juts out on the west side. Very similar to what you just looked at Mac Point. You have a upland area here in purple, and then the green area is the heavy lift quayside area. This is about a 37 acre total concept, and would fill the same role as the concept that you just looked at Mac Point. They would essentially do the same thing. So this is a concept that was developed just specifically for this site. The criteria were plugged in, and this is kind of what came out of it. So this would be a phase 1 type project that could support up to a research scale offshore wind project. about 150 to 200 megawatts. What you're looking at here is about upwards of 100 million cost wise. And really that big cost delta between Mac Point and Sears Island would have to do with the significant amount of dredging that would be required at Mac Point, as well as the blasting and perhaps the work that would have to be done to relocate facilities in the rail line. So if anybody's wondering why the big cost difference, that's what we're seeing right now for that, just at a preliminary level. Here's the phase 2 concept, about 65 total acres. Total costs about 184 million to construct something like this. This is a commercial scale build out that could support up to 1,000 plus megawatts of offshore wind projects. The potential for dredging, again, is still very limited, if any at all. And really this is about what you're looking at here represents about 20% of the transportation parcel, or about 7% of the entire island. And all this, of course, is subject to permitting, design, and cost, hence the need to be able to go on site and collect more data to be able to help refine these estimates and numbers and really know what we're dealing with here. So when we did look at Sears Island, it was important to us to consider a whole island approach, especially if there's any thought of investment into any sort of facility there, what other types of projects could be supported with that investment that would enhance the experience for users of the island. So we did a small exercise based off of discussions that have been had over the years about what are some amenities that could benefit the island. So really all of this is conceptual and subject to a lot of change and discussion or through discussion, but essentially everything remains the same. The transportation parcel boundaries don't change in any way, but what you see is some potential improvements here to the northeast section of the island that would be consistent, with the joint use plan and the conservation easement and any informal discussions that have happened over the years between MaineDOT and the Friends of Sears Island. So again, this is just a concept, but something worth thinking about, that I think is important, moving forward as we, further to the discussions in the Port of Searsport. And this is just a zoomed in kind of view of that. But essentially what you're looking at here would be a possible, visitor and education center, water access, trail improvements, restrooms, additional parking, and perhaps some sort of endowment to support continued operations there. So users of the island can continue to benefit from the experience of being able to go out there and do what they like to do. Okay, so just kind of zooming out a little bit and talking about the bigger picture. Obviously, we're talking about a hub location for offshore wind infrastructure, fabrication of foundations, installation of the WTGs, et cetera, at the Port of Searsport. But really what we wanted to do early on was think about the bigger picture and how this industry might impact port development in the state of Maine. I think it could impact port development significantly. And I think that all three of our deep water ports in the state could potentially play a role to support an emerging offshore wind industry as the state matures with the industry. So for instance, if you have a hub location in Searsport where you're doing that kind of manufacturing type of role, perhaps because the main research array has, been planned to go, I guess about 25 miles off the Port of Portland, then the proximity of Portland and, the available infrastructure that's already there makes it a prime candidate to be an operations and maintenance port. So everything from being able to transfer crew and parts and things like that out to the research array location is certainly valuable. And I think very much worth looking into and exploring further, through studies like this. So we've actually commissioned our consultants with Moffatt and Nichol to do a second study and further explore port infrastructure statewide and look at not just the individual ports, but specific sites in those ports to see how they could pivot to roles to support offshore wind. So, obviously I mentioned Portland, as a potential operations and maintenance facility. But again, you have the Port of Eastport further to the north, has the deepest water on the East Coast for available ports. It could, play a significant role in providing facilities where, wind turbine components could be manufactured. It could be a possible site where many activities related to, offshore wind could be conducted. And sites there could be developed to support that industry. So it was really a pretty exciting exercise to see how every port in the state could potentially play a role in this industry, because it's similar to what we're seeing in other states, where there's a very large or significant need to develop support facilities as that industry matures in those states. So we anticipate being done with that second study by the end of February or close to it. So look forward to being able to share that information with all of you, so you can kind of get an idea of how the state at large could play a role in this. And so I'll talk a little bit about what our next steps are. Obviously, we're going to continue the initial rollout of our next steps. So everything that we're doing, just like this meeting today, is very important to us to get the word out that we've studied the Port of Searsport. Here's the results, and we look forward to being able to share more information and work in a stakeholder process to be able to hopefully build some infrastructure in the Port of Searsport. And that kind of ties in nicely to the second bullet, which is to develop a robust stakeholder and public communication process. That's something that I had talked about earlier, even at the tail end of 2021, and we still don't have any announcements to make on the stakeholder process. But I guess my message to everybody in this group is that that's still happening. We're taking time to make sure that we get it right. And make sure that we're, considering the work that this group's going to do, so that it's valuable to the process. And I just want to say that, we feel that everybody who wants to have a say in this process will be able to do that, or at least have some sort of representation in that stakeholder group. We are very committed to that being an inclusive process and making sure that everybody's able to participate. So I guess, in a nutshell, it's taking some time, but I definitely look forward to sharing more and being able to get the word out about that process here, hopefully by the end of February. So stay tuned for that. Also, kind of on a parallel track, we want to start collecting more data. We don't have enough data or enough information at this point to really be able to advance our concepts any further, to be able to put that forward and speak intelligently about it. So it's very important to us that we start collecting that data, whether it's geotechnical, bathymetric, site survey work, that sort of stuff, so that we can start providing that data and helping us, make better informed decisions, and being able to review that with our stakeholders. So we anticipate that work to start in the coming months. And I will also just kind of say that, tying into that, all of that information is going to be made available for everybody to access and digest in an efficient and highly visible way. And what I mean by that is there'll likely be a website where that can kind of act as a clearinghouse for information about anything that we're doing with regards to offshore wind port development in Searsport moving forward. So everything from, when we'll have personnel, in orange vests out on the island, doing a site survey or any sort of bathymetric work or borings or anything like that. That'll all be noticed weeks in advance, and be able to provide a way for everybody to comment on that. So that's very important to us, and we'll be making announcements about that at some point in the very near future, so everybody's made aware of what our process is there. Using the data that we collect, we'd like to move beyond concepts, consider practicable alternatives, designs, analyze environmental and cost implications. That's really going to be the core part of our stakeholder work. I see this stakeholder group as being more technical in nature, and really being the first take on review of the alternatives and options that we have for port development in Searsport. So that's all going to kind of tie in together. And then really the last, I guess, bullet to talk about is we need to think about federal funding and how we're going to pursue that. So if we are building a port in the Port of Searsport, the state of Maine will need help at the federal level to provide funding assistance for that. So what are the pathways that are available to us? What are the most appropriate? Those are the kind of things that we're going to start exploring here in the coming months, and be able to talk more about that as we get more information. So really, that's the end of my presentation. So again, happy to move on to the next part where we answer questions or whatever that may be. But there you have it.
Thank you so much, Matt. And thanks to Selena too. I really appreciate the thorough and really interesting overview of where we are, where we're headed, what all of the many, many variables are. You see up on the screen right now a couple of ways for folks to go further. Many of you know that this is the part of the program where we share the call to action. And later this afternoon, you'll get an email with links to all of those things. So the Offshore Wind Initiative has a homepage. The Offshore Wind Roadmap has its own site. And there's also a place to learn about the Maine Research Array on the Governor's Energy Office page. You'll also see in that follow-up email this afternoon a way to sign up through MCV to get more information. Want to be super clear here. We are going to do everything we can to turn those addresses, email addresses, over to Matt and his team when that stakeholder process gets going. But we know many of you are eager to get on that stakeholder list, so we'll do everything we can to help compile those and get the list going. Also want to remind everyone that we have so many questions today. I already know we're not going to get to all of them, but I'm super grateful to Matt and to Selena for both inviting questions directly through their emails, and thank you so much for being available for that. We care a lot about this, and we want to know all the good stuff. So before we get into the meat of the Port of Searsport, can you just help me keep track again? How far offshore are offshore wind turbines? Are we talking about placing offshore wind turbines? And how much offshore wind do we think we need to meet our clean energy goals? Just to get that framing.
Sure. So the one turbine project off Monhegan Island that is under development is in state waters, which is within 3 miles of our shore. And the last legislative session, the legislature took a step to stop any large-scale commercial offshore wind projects from being in state waters, which is from the shore to 3 miles offshore. So the research project that the state is pursuing is about 25 miles offshore, 25 to 30 miles offshore. Federal leasing is anticipated to be some distance offshore in federal waters. We don't know where that will be. The federal government has announced that they're initiating that process. It'll be a multi-year process they'll also take input from stakeholders on that, so people can participate in that process as well. Did you have a follow-up question to that, Kathleen?
No, that's super helpful. Thank you. And then Matt, I really appreciated seeing those criteria for what we need in a port. And remind us, I know you said there could be a role for all of the major ports in the state, or for many ports to play. How was Searsport chosen as the focus for this study?
Well, really, that decision came, from Governor Mills, the DOT. So that was really where we started. I mean, I think geographically it makes sense because, well, I guess for a couple of reasons. I mean, Searsport's kind of centrally located on the coast of Maine, so it's not too far to the south or too far to the north. We already kind of meet a lot of the criteria just right off the bat. There's no air draft restrictions, deep water access. It's a fine place to conduct port operations, just kind of as a baseline. So really, I mean, that was I guess the main part of the decision-making process. I think another point worth talking about is at least at Mac Point, they're already handling a lot of the terrestrial wind turbine components there, and are kind of no stranger to wind in general. So it just kind of seemed like the natural fit. Searsport's really our primary heavy lift port in the state. So it made a lot of sense to start there, at least. And you got to start somewhere. So
Absolutely. And thank you.
Sure.
Were there specific things that precluded Eastport or Portland that made, bumped those below Searsport for this initial step and study?
I would say at this point, it's hard to say that anything's really off the table. I think, when you look at, I guess, like the upland area of the Port of Eastport, there would be some significant leveling and grading that would have to be done at a place like that. Because really, like for what we're talking about here, you need a very flat, level surface. I don't think I really have a great answer, that kind of just precluded it right off the bat. But something that I would imagine we'll go back to and study further. So.
Thank you. And then thinking about the Moffatt and Nichols report specifically, remind me, I'm just a little confused about Sears Island, Mac Point. You showed that slide with the 4 different areas of the study. Did the report conclude that Sears Island should be the hub, or are we talking Sears Island and Mac Point, or what are we looking at?
So really what we did with those criteria, we plugged it into really the 2 most viable sites, which were Mac Point and Sears Island. And what we arrived at were that both sites could support the criteria for offshore wind. We know that the concepts fit on both sites. When we kind of found that out on their own,
okay.
Correct. We took it a step further and said, well, okay, so like in looking at what else is being proposed on the East Coast for port infrastructure, what sets Maine apart or Searsport apart from any of those other sites? And when you look at how all of those sites could kind of tie together and function as one, offshore wind port entity, I guess, for lack of a better term, I think there's a tremendous amount of versatility in trying to synergize all the sites as much as possible. So, if we can utilize, laydown that's available at Mac Point, fabricate, foundation, I'm just saying hypothetically, fabricate foundations at Sears Island, and then use the GAC site for staging and, moving components down to Mac Point by rail. I mean, something like that, something in a way where we can take advantage of all this area and kind of tie it all together. That's where we came up with that multi-site port concept that you mentioned.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So
Yeah.
one site on its own could potentially do the job, but we're thinking about not just doing the job, but really thriving and creating a really a port that can sustain the work or support the work that we're imagining down the road as well.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. There are a lot of folks on the call today who remember many different proposals for Searsport over the years. How is this project different than, say, the LNG proposal or some of the other things that we remember from past battles or conversations?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of that discussion is, before or was before my time with the state, but just my understanding of it is really the nature of the cargo, and we're talking about green energy here. We're not talking about something volatile like liquid natural gas or hydrocarbon products or something like that. I mean, we're talking about assembling components to construct renewable energy wind turbines. And I think just that by itself, is significant because it lends a lot of opportunity to our port facilities in Searsport, but it also is kind of a game changer because, Searsport has always kind of been known as like an oil terminal. I mean, I know they do general cargo and, dry bulk and project cargo, but to think about the Port of Searsport, being designated for renewables, I think is really exciting, at least to me. Thinking about, the future here in the state of Maine and our response to the climate crisis, I think it makes it stand on its own, I think, and automatically kind of sets it apart from anything else that's been proposed there. That's kind of, assuming that, there's something that actually gets built. I mean, I think, we're still very early in the process, and this is really just all a concept, and we're kind of trying to, figure out what our next move is or what really is the appropriate path here. But the idea of making this a renewable port is a really big deal, at least to me, and makes me really excited. So
I love that concept that you shared about the visitor information and the opportunity to use this as an educational site as well. Way more interesting and compelling than an oil or an LNG port, right? To say this is part of the climate action and climate solutions. There are, when we think about the Climate Council's work and the recommendations that lead us to procuring more offshore wind, we also got recommendations about how important it is to balance the impacts on natural and working lands. So how do we do that? How do we both develop the port infrastructure that we need and think about the current ecological value, recreational value of the Port of Searsport and of Sears Island in particular?
I think that's a great question. I would actually coin that the $100 million question, probably, because it's probably the most important.
You don't have a quick soundbite answer to that one? Come on.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the most important question that we'll ask, moving forward. And I think the only way that we can really answer that is through the stakeholder process. And that to me is really the entire point of that initiative. And really, like, the intention of that group, I think, is to be advisory to the DOT, since we're lead on this project here. And, the overwhelming consensus, feels that there's an imbalance there, then I feel like, we really need to pay attention to that, because it's the most important thing, I think. And, I know we haven't really started talking about that, but I imagine that'll be a big focal point of that whole process moving forward. It's trying to really, strike the balance there and not, make sure that if we move forward with something, we're really moving forward with the best interests of the people of Maine and the stakeholders in the Port of Searsport. So
Matt, I really appreciate that, and the recognition that there's not an easy answer here.
Right.
It's not that there is one and we're not paying attention to it. It's just that this is truly complicated and there are a lot of things to balance. I know many folks are looking back to some of the previous conversations about Sears Island, and I'm actually going to read from the consensus agreement that came out of a Sears Island planning process some years ago, because otherwise I'll never summarize it adequately. So what it says is that Mac Point shall be given preference as an alternative to port development on Sears Island. And it also says that all parties agree that they would not object to or oppose fulfillment of a cargo or container port on Sears Island, once such development has satisfied all regulatory requirements, and that includes applicable environmental standards and alternatives analysis and all of those things. So how is DOT thinking about meeting those requirements?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, bottom line, right off the bat, the Maine DOT, as we advance any of this and move any of this forward, it intends to fully honor the Sears Island Planning Initiative, period. That's a huge part of our decision making. It's work that's already been done, that there's no need to, redo over again to, reach the same conclusion. I think that, when you look at the advantages of Mac Point and Sears Island, kind of like as I was talking about, I mean, it's pretty obvious that there's a significant amount of development that already exists on Mac Point and would have to be either removed or relocated if we wanted to put, a 40-acre parcel smack dab in the middle of the terminal. So, I think that's going to be a part of the alternatives analysis review and, all a part of the stakeholder work that we're going to do, is to really kind of drill that down. And I think that part of it really is a business case, I mean, is it worth it, for the benefit of gaining this infrastructure to be able to build these, components for wind turbines and assemble them, to relocate, almost the entire facility at Mac Point somewhere else or remove it completely. Maybe it is, I don't know. But I mean, I know that I can't do that because I don't own, the state doesn't own that facility. I mean, that's a privately owned facility. So, I mean, I think it's another complicated question, but I think, we're fully cognizant of exactly what you stated from that document and intend to honor that. So, that may be a conclusion that gets drawn very early in the stakeholder process, and that's okay. Because I think at the end of the day, if the state can benefit from this and the facility can be built somewhere where, we've all agreed that that's the right place to do it, then I think that's a win-win to me. But I think that we have to go. I mean, we have to start the process and we have to start the conversations. So.
Absolutely. Matt, I am so grateful for you doing the work that you're doing and sharing it with us today. Selena, same to you. Thank you so much for giving us that really important context up at the top and for shepherding this process along through the state. We're clearly not done talking about offshore wind. I've got a whole list of questions here that it's driving me crazy. We don't have time to get to, but I know that we're going to have lots of opportunities to talk in the coming months. Selena, thanks for mentioning that you or someone will be back in this space on April 15th. That's when we will bring a presentation about initial recommendations of the offshore wind roadmap process to our lunch and learn space. So definitely mark your calendars for that one. Thank you all for joining us today. We won't talk about offshore wind for a couple more weeks, but we've got a great conversation scheduled for next week about climate education. It is not an entirely dissimilar topic so we will have folks from Maine's Environmental Priorities Coalition and other advocates coming to talk about LD 1902, which is one of our priorities this year. It will give the teachers the tools they need to really effectively teach young people about climate change, the challenges ahead, and the opportunities as well. So I hope to see you all then. I'm grateful for all of you. Hope you have a wonderful, warm, practically springy weekend, and we'll see you back here soon. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Selena. Thanks to everybody.
You bet. Thank you all.
Thanks.